Hello everyone and welcome to this tactical analysis on the Arne Slot's Liverpool Football Club. I won't harp on too much with the introductions, but if you could please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed the content. This does take a bit of time to make, and I would like to grow the channel to a place where I can use a bit more, a bit better software to make the viewing experience a bit better for you. But without further ado, we'll get into it. So the games we'll be focusing on today is the 3-1 Champions League win against AC Milan, and then the following game against AFC Bournemouth, in which they won 3-0. Both games they started off with a few teetering issues, but then Arne Slot quickly made some adjustments the early part of the game to really help Liverpool dominate the rest of the way, and it shows in the scorelines, having only conceded the once and scoring 6 goals over the 2 games. So we're going to first look at Liverpool in possession. So when playing out from the back, Liverpool like to set up in what seems like a 4-2-4 shape, with Szoboszlai moving into the front 4 and wide, with the other midfielders in McAllister and Gravenberch operating a double pivot. But it quickly morphs into a 4-3-3 with clever movement from these players. This allows them 1v1s all over the pitch, which plays into their offensive capabilities of their players, or to create numerical advantages in areas of the pitch. They were particularly trying to play into these areas on the wings, between Milan's fullback and winger, and form their shape to allow for this. So Szoboszlai, if we look at his little icon here, he would often come into these spots, and Cody Gakpo would often drift into these spots as well. And it was very similar against Bournemouth. Bournemouth didn't shape up with a 4-2-4 press that Milan did. They were more of a 4-4-2, so they held their wingers back to protect these areas. But due to Liverpool's positioning of Szoboszlai in particular, he's really the key. He's almost like a traditional free roaming number 9 that just goes wherever he can sort of see that he can create a numerical advantage. And he often is a bit unheralded. He may not seem like he's had a big influence on the match. I know against Bournemouth it didn't seem like that, but he often does a lot of sacrificial positioning to allow others to find space and to receive in space, because he will often take up an opposition defender, of whether it's a midfielder or someone from the back 4. Here we can see McAllister's heat map, because I wanted to show this first, because as you can see where I've got the players positioned, Gravenberch is really in that single pivot position. Now a lot of you may think, well, they actually play with a double pivot, but whilst they may sort of set up like that, McAllister likes to drift a bit higher in this left-sided position. We can see he's got a large heat spot here, because this is against AC Milan. He was able to come forward a lot more once they got control of the game. But he does have a little one here where when they would play out, he would often situate himself here, which is a bit further forward than you would probably expect the double pivot to operate. And then if we look at Gravenberch's, we can see that he's got a big heat spot in a traditional single pivot position, right in the heart, right in the midline of the pitch, sort of in that defensive area. It's not too deep because Liverpool got most of the field position throughout the game, but he does have one down here because he does like to push forward a little bit and support on that right hand side, being the right-handed sided player of this so-called double pivot that they operate with. Firstly, we're going to look at just their shape in isolation. So we can see it's right from the start of the game, 18-second mark, and AC Milan are operating this 4-2-4, which a lot of teams are doing these days. Even Liverpool will do it, which we'll get to later, but it does mean that these spaces here are open. And it did cost AC Milan a little bit, and Liverpool were very successful and able to play into these areas. And they do this through the particular positioning of Szoboszlai. Against AC Milan, we could see him drop into wider areas, with Salah moving across to pin this fullback, allowing Szoboszlai the space. This either meant that the holding midfielder had to come across, or the centre-back had to decide to pick up Salah and then the fullback to pick up Szoboszlai, but it would mean that there's a lot of space here, which as a defensive unit you probably don't want. But because there's so much rotation to pick up Szoboszlai, it opens up this big pocket in midfield, which allows Trent to receive and then just flick it into Gravenberch, sort of in this central area of midfield. Before we go into looking more in depth at that, I'm just going to show Szoboszlai's heat map and see where he positions himself. And we can see it's all over the central areas and right-sided areas of the field. He doesn't really have a lot of heat spots like McAllister and Gravenberch do. He does drift a lot. He's a real traditional number 9, sort of free-roaming centre attacking midfielder that does hang out on this right-hand side to help support Salah and create overloads, whereas McAllister sort of hangs on the left, and Gakpo, or whether it's Diaz, they tend to get their overloads through that avenue really. McAllister sort of just hangs out that side. We're first going to see that Gravenberch example. We can see that the holding midfield, I think that might be Loftus-Cheek or whoever, is coming across to defend Szoboszlai, and we can see Gravenberch has totally identified this, and I think Trent's even had a glance to see. He's very clever, Trent. He'll be able to probably identify this in real time. And in this clip, we can see it in full motion. So he just easily steps to the defender, and then we can see the holding midfielders come across, and Gravenberch is in this little pocket here. From here, all it takes is for Trent to step this winger, and a lot of wingers don't put on great pressure, particularly in top teams. A lot of those wingers seem to just want to play the offensive side of the ball and don't care too much for pressing, which can be to the downfall of their teams, unfortunately. But all it takes really is for this little pass to come through to Gravenberch, and he can either flick it on to Salah, who's pinning this fullback. If the fullback decides to take Gravenberch, he can just flick it on, or Szoboszlai can make a run into this space here. As we can see, there's a big pocket of space where Gravenberch can really receive and, you know, lift his head up and actually have a look, rather than being totally under pressure because of that Salah pinning that fullback. As we can see in the clip, Trent just flicks it through, and because the fullback stayed with Salah, it's meant that Szoboszlai can receive in this wide area. And while there are some Milan bodies, it has meant that Liverpool have successfully transitioned the ball from pretty much into their final third. You know, he could flick the ball onto Salah there, or, you know, hold possession and let the team form their shape forward of centre. Again, the positioning of Szoboszlai is crucial in giving Trent space in this other example to push the ball forward. And in this example, Szoboszlai is pinning the Milan holding midfielder to allow Trent to progress. So instead of coming out wide, Szoboszlai is coming narrow to keep control of this midfielder. The ball's with Virgil van Dijk, so it's on the sort of the other half of the ground if we think of it horizontally. So this is the top half, and this is the bottom half. It just means that you just have to transition the ball quickly or directly, and Trent's got space now. So we can see here that Milan are very narrow. They really don't want Liverpool to come through the middle, which a lot of teams are doing as well. And we see Szoboszlai's occupying this midfielder. Jota's also come in. He likes to play a bit of a false 9 type role, which can also occupy a midfielder, but in this instance he's picked up Szoboszlai, and it's a pretty simple pass which Trent can then go into this space. We can now see that Trent has space to push forward, and Szoboszlai has again positioned himself to where Liverpool have 2 1v1s on this side of the pitch in their front line. We also notice the numbers that Liverpool have going forward in the attack. We can see that they've got bodies in front of these 2 holding midfielders, which is potentially dangerous for Milan. So we can see in the full clip, you know, Szoboszlai's taken off there, but it's meant that they can't really cover Trent anyway, and he's able to just push forward. Another player I would like to look at is Cody Gakpo. He was in place with Diaz. They're both sort of similar in the way they like to hang out on this wing. But though he was particularly important to Liverpool's progression, particularly against AC Milan, he worked in tandem with McAllister, as he likes to hang on that left-hand side. They often played down the left, where McAllister likes to drift. And both he and Jota, who likes to drop into that false 9 and occupy a midfielder, were able to successfully work it through with Gakpo. And it sort of looks like this. They sort of come across, and then a midfielder has to come across, and then another one has to come across. And what all that does is, by playing out this side, it does open up space for Szoboszlai to receive the ball in midfield, which is another example I'd like to show. So here we can see it starting to develop. The ball's being transitioned over to Trent. You can see Szoboszlai is in the middle. He's currently being occupied. We can also see that Jota's here. The two midfielders for Liverpool are here. But because of Milan's shape being this narrow 4-2-4, there is that space on the wing for the wingers to hit up and receive defeat. So the ball's transitioned across. McAllister comes over to try and receive, so the midfielder follows him. And Jota comes over to try and receive, so the other Milan midfielder follows him, which leaves Szoboszlai pretty much all on his own. We can see that both midfielders have come across to stop the ball, but it's meant that, yeah, Szoboszlai's, Gakpo's got a really easy pass to make into Szoboszlai, and it just opens up this whole half of the field. You can see the space in front of him. He doesn't have to take a real close touch. He can knock it out in front of him and lift his head up. And we can see that in the clip here. So the ball's transitioned across. Gakpo receives. The midfielders have come up. And it's left this gap down to Szoboszlai, who can, carry forward, flick it across to Salah, who's in more space. And they can really attack from there. Another advantage of the way Liverpool's set up is that even if they do get squeezed in, they can always launch it towards one of their front four. Because in this shape, because it's pretty much identical to the way Milan are defending. And when you move, your 9 up front and create a 4v4 against the back line, because most teams play with a back 4, you do get those 1v1s. So by pushing your 2 pivots up, it does create a lot of space in between the lines. So your forwards don't have to take an incredibly tight touch. They can back their opponent up and knock the ball out in front of them, or, have a more comfortable touch, or flick a layoff to a running teammate that's going past. And in this example against Bournemouth, we can see that Bournemouth have squeezed up quite well. They've got 4 of the attackers that's really closing in on Konate. He can't really reverse it the other way. Can't really give it to Trent or any of these inside midfielders, so he is forced to knock the ball long. We can see that there's a big bit of space here that he can just flick the ball into and know that Salah's so strong that he can probably control this ball, and he's got support from teammates. And then what happens is Salah's able to just flick it over, and Trent's got the ball and he's able to push forward, and that was really the build up to their second goal. So we can see in the clip that Konate flicks it forward. Salah's able to just run onto it really and receive and flick it across to Trent, who's able to then go on and find Diaz for goal number 2. We can also see in this example again that Bournemouth close right in on Konate, and he just flicks it forward, and Nunez's header was incredible, but it's very easy for Salah just to recover that loose ball and flick it across to Nunez again, and then that was Liverpool's 3rd goal. So from here we're going to look at Liverpool out of possession. So to start with, they like to play with a very aggressive front 4, particularly to start the game, and it's often to their own detriment. You'll often see Liverpool sort of hold back after that first 10 or 15 minutes. It's like they've still got some of that Jurgen Klopp heavy metal football still ingrained in them. But what you'll commonly see is this 4-2-4 shape with Gravenberch and McAllister in the holding midfield areas, and Szoboszlai coming up to join that front four. Jota, or whoever the striker is usually one to press the goalkeeper, and then it sort of forms from there. But Milan were quite successful at being able to play through this, utilising pretty much the same thing Liverpool were doing, which is this space on the touchlines, really. They would often move players into these areas, knowing that the ball was coming to get there. And what it would do is pretty much what Liverpool were doing to Milan. It would pull all Liverpool's players over, leaving space here just to flick the ball back into. It's very Brighton-like, very De Zerbi and Brighton-like. And as we can see in the next example, that's sort of where the ball travels. So we can see Jota's decided to press the goalkeeper. Now he presses instantly. He doesn't really wait for anyone to set up or for the team to be settled. He just goes. It's that heavy metal football that they've sort of been used to. And it did sort of play into Milan's hands. So he was able to flick the ball over to the centre back. Salah then pressed. We can see Gravenberch's realising this, and he feels like he has to come up on Hernandez. But all that does is leave this space here for Milan to play out and then flick the ball back into midfield. So they're able to work it out here, Milan, and they can just knock the ball over. We can see even Konate's come up to try and stop this. And McAllister doesn't want to come across because he's trying to protect Konate, who's come up with the ball. And all it really takes is a quick flick into the middle, and Milan are away into all this space. As we can see, yeah, McAllister, he can't really cover that. We can also see that in Bournemouth's play, another example. Liverpool press right away, and Bournemouth were able to play into those wide areas and just play to feet and then flick it into the middle. It's also evident in Milan's goal against Liverpool. Here, Jota presses the keeper instantly, so the keeper really just decides to launch the ball because he knows that there's going to be space out there. I'm sure they would have talked about it. And he just launches it over to this fullback, Calabria. And it's meant that Tsimikas has either had to hold his position or come up and try and contest. Because McAllister's come up to fill in for Szoboszlai, so there's no cover there. So it's really up to Tsimikas to try and decide. But it is a 2v1, so he's either got to make an influence or he needs to hold and wait for the troops to come back. And unfortunately, Calabria was able to get a header on it, and I think it was Pulisic picked the ball up and carried it forward. And we can see that in the goal. So he launches it forward, Calabria wins the header, Morata flicks it on, and all of a sudden they're out, and Pulisic goes on to score the first goal. So the one change that Slot made in both games was that he told his players to settle. Don't instantly press up on the keeper because it's playing into the opposing team's hands. They're waiting to draw you out. That's what they're trying to do. Whereas if you hold, it's really up to the keeper to make something happen. As we can see, Jota and Salah are holding their position. They're not quite pressing Maignan. They're waiting for him to make a decision, or if he holds onto the ball, that's when they'll sort of crouch up to him. But we can see it's enabled Trent to come up a bit higher. You know, it's enabled the whole team to squeeze up on Milan. And once Jota decides to go and press Maignan, he just launches it long, and it's meant that Konate can get an easy receive. And we can see that in this clip here. So Jota waits, he has a quick look, sees that he's sitting on it a bit long, and there's really no options for Maignan except to just boot it long. One thing I will say about so far under Arne Slot's reign, he's been very successful at progressing the ball forward and also pressing the opposing team. We think of that Man United game, they really pressed well and set them into traps. You know, it's very successful tactics against teams that don't have very mobile holding midfielders or pivots. You know, if we think of Casemiro, he's not very mobile, he's not very expansive, he can't really carry the ball, and that's why Liverpool were very successful at putting pressure on him. Whereas against Milan, they're a little bit better, and that's why they were able to transition the ball a bit easier to start with. But once Slot sort of got his players more connected in terms of their press, about when to press and when to wait for the team to get into good shape to press, that's when they were really able to dominate. But with the ball, Szoboszlai is really the key. He's the key to the progression. Wherever he positions himself is generally where the ball travels. If you watch Szoboszlai next Liverpool game, if he starts, just watch where he goes, and generally the ball travels over that way. Another very good player this season has been Gravenberch. He's really taken control of that single pivot position because McAllister does like to drift a little bit more. I think Gravenberch's really become that rock in midfield. He's very agile, can carry the ball, very quick as well for his size. Another player I'd like to see what Arne Slot does with is Darwin Núñez, because he's very dynamic. As we saw in the Bournemouth game, he scored a really good goal on the left foot, curling in. And I'd just like to see what Slot can do with him, because we all know he's a raw talent. He's very explosive, and I think that's just another dynamic Slot has in his forward. You know, he's a very hard worker as well, Núñez. He'll run all day for you. I think that's a very good trait of his. I'd also like to see what he does with Cody Gakpo. You know, he's looked very good so far, Gakpo, in the games he has played out on that left, and I think Slot's going to use him out on that left, because when he got subbed on against Bournemouth, Chiesa went into that central striker position, and I am excited to see what Slot can do with Chiesa. That's another forward that likes to pick up the ball and dance around players and will put pressure on, and seems very intelligent as well. But all in all, that was the tactical analysis of Arne Slot's Liverpool. If you have liked the video, or if you have learnt something, please do think about liking and subscribing to the channel. As I said, I would like to get some more sophisticated software to make the viewing experience and the analysis a bit quicker, and for me, and the viewing experience, sorry, a bit better for you. But all in all, if you watch Liverpool in the future, see if you can spot any of these sort of tactics, or whether they've changed them depending on the team they play. But I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a great day.